The year was 1895. Charlotte Miller, a young woman from New York, left behind the lively streets of her childhood and crossed the Atlantic to meet a future she had not chosen. Her marriage to Edward, the Duke of Harrington, was not a love story but a contract, a bargain between her father's fortune and the Duke's failing estate. The voyage itself had been long and harsh. The sea air stung her cheeks and the rocking of the ship left her body aching, yet none of it compared to the silence that greeted her upon arriving in England. Harrington House stood grey and unwelcoming, its stone walls heavy with history. When Charlotte awoke in her new chamber that first morning, the cold, damp air crept into her bones, reminding her how far she was from the warmth of New York. It was not only the climate that chilled her, it was the people. Servants watched her with quiet judgment, whispering about the American girl who had bought herself a title. At breakfast, Edward barely spoke, his tone clipped and distant, as if she were a guest rather than a wife. Soon, Charlotte met Lady Harwick, the governess tasked with shaping her into a proper duchess. Lady Harwick's eyes were sharp, her voice stern, and her lessons merciless. "Your posture," she demanded, tapping Charlotte's shoulder with a cane. "A duchess must carry herself with grace, never slouch, never stumble." Charlotte tried, but every word, every step, every gesture was corrected. Her speech was called too loud, her laughter too free, her walk too careless. Day by day she realized her freedom was slipping away. What had once been natural to her, smiling openly, speaking her mind, was now considered inappropriate. She was no longer Charlotte Miller from New York. She was to become the Duchess of Harrington, a title wrapped in rules, expectations, and silent sacrifices. And yet, deep within, Charlotte's spirit refused to be crushed. Though she was being shaped into a figure that fit their world, she carried with her the strength of the girl she had once been. She knew this was only the beginning of a struggle that would demand everything from her: her patience, her courage, and her will to survive in a house that was not her own. Weeks turned into months, and Charlotte's new life pressed down on her like an iron weight. Lady Harwick's lessons grew harsher, endless drills on how to sit, how to bow, how to greet nobles without appearing too eager or too cold. Every mistake brought a sharp rebuke. But the greatest test came when she was summoned to Buckingham Palace for her presentation before Queen Victoria. The very thought of it filled her with dread. To falter in front of the Queen would mean disgrace, not just for Charlotte but for the Harrington name. On the day of the presentation, Charlotte's gown was heavy with jewels and lace. Her heart pounded as she stepped into the Grand Hall, surrounded by the most powerful figures of the empire. The Queen's gaze was steady and severe. For a brief moment, Charlotte felt as though she were no longer a woman but a carefully polished ornament, displayed for judgment. Yet she did not stumble. She curtsied with perfect grace, her body trembling beneath the surface but her face calm and composed. When the Queen gave the faintest nod of approval, relief swept through her like a tide. She had passed the test. Afterward, at a gathering of noblewomen, Charlotte's isolation began to crack. She met Lady Ashford, an American duchess who had walked the same path years before. Lady Ashford's smile carried warmth Charlotte had not felt since leaving New York. "My dear," Lady Ashford whispered, "do not think you are alone. We American brides must look out for one another. The English may have their rules, but we have our spirit." It was then Charlotte learned of the quiet network known as the Dollar Duchesses, women like herself who had exchanged their fortunes for titles, and who now shared secrets, strategies, and encouragement in this foreign world. For the first time since her arrival, Charlotte felt something she had nearly lost: hope. But the fragile comfort did not last. One evening, while reviewing estate accounts left carelessly on her husband's desk, Charlotte discovered unsettling truths. Edward's finances were in disarray, his debts mounting. Worse still, hidden among the records were regular payments to a woman whose name she did not recognize. The implication was clear: infidelity, deception, and ruin. Charlotte stared at the papers, her heart pounding, her hands trembling. She had been brought here as a savior, her dowry meant to rescue Harrington House. And yet Edward treated her not as a partner but as a purse to be emptied at will. In that moment something hardened within her. She would no longer be the helpless bride they believed her to be. She would fight, not only for her dignity, but for her future. Charlotte did not confront Edward immediately. Instead she turned to the quiet strength of her new allies. Lady Ashford introduced her to Lord James Winters, a man of keen mind and discreet sympathies, and through him, Charlotte was guided to a solicitor named George Bennet, one of the few in London willing to advise women in her position. Late at night, in candlelit meetings behind closed doors, Charlotte began to secure her dowry, transferring her money into trusts and protections that Edward could not touch. Every signature, Every sealed document gave her back a piece of the power that had been taken from her. When the time came, she faced Edward. The Duke was furious at her defiance, slamming his fist against the desk, demanding obedience, but Charlotte no longer trembled. "You may have bought my fortune," she said evenly, "but you will not own me." Her words left a silence heavier than any storm. Edward realized, perhaps for the first time, that his wife was no longer the naive girl who had stepped off the ship from New York. She had become a duchess not only in title but in strength. From that day forward their marriage shifted. Publicly, they played their roles, the Duke and Duchess of Harrington, a noble couple fit for the gaze of the Queen. Privately, Charlotte drew her boundaries with unshakable resolve. She refused to be a silent pawn. And as months passed, she found herself shaping a new life within the cold walls of Harrington House. The network of Dollar Duchesses grew into her circle of strength, women bound together not by love or family, but by resilience. They shared advice, laughter, and courage in whispers, rewriting their places in history quietly but powerfully. Charlotte stood before her mirror one morning, dressed in silks and jewels, ready to attend another grand affair. But what she saw reflected was not just the Duchess of Harrington. She saw Charlotte Miller of New York, the girl who had crossed an ocean, endured hardship, and carved her own fate in a world determined to silence her. She smiled, not with the practiced grace of a duchess, but with the quiet triumph of a woman who had survived, adapted, and claimed her destiny. For though the aristocracy had sought to shape her into something else, Charlotte had achieved something far greater. She had become herself, both duchess and American, both ornament and strategist, both prisoner and ultimately free.